I think in our everyday life, we really love to have these like do-over moments. We love to have these moments of trying to like start over, right? There was a while ago where we had the Febreze commercials where they'd have like a fresh start, right, and all those things. But we have moments, right, where we're talking to somebody and we think they're cute or they're a little above us in the workplace, and so we talk and we embarrass ourselves, right? And like, oh man, I didn't mean to say it that way, or we stumble over our words and we wish we could kind of do over. We could back up and try again at something. I've had a lot of moments like that. Ask Erin, ask my wife. I've had a lot of moments where I'm like, I didn't mean to say that. I need to start over. But you see, friends, this is an important moment in the book of Romans. But before we get to Romans, I kind of actually want to spend a moment in the Old Testament. Because in the Old Testament, there's this moment where the people of God kind of have a let's try again moment. You see, in the story of the early chapters and early books of the Bible, the book of Exodus, we read of God using this man named Moses to lead millions of Hebrews out of slavery of Egypt and towards this promised land. We read the amazing story of them crossing through the Red Sea, what we just sang a minute ago, and working their way through the mountains. And it comes to this moment where they come up onto the edge of the Jordan River, and they see this beautiful land that God has been talking about for them. He's like, I want to bring you to this place. It's going to be your home. I'm going to give this over to you. It's amazing land, amazing land. And they get there, and they kind of already knew that it was occupied by some other folks, but when they send out some spies to go take a look, they get really intimidated and really scared. I mean, they've already seen God part the Red Sea. They've already seen him free them from Egypt and bring them to the mountains and protect them and feed them and take care of them along the way. But when they reach this moment, their fear really grabs a hold of them. And they decide, Lord, we see how strong these nations are and how big these nations are and how mean these folks are. I mean, their practices and ways of life were detestable and evil and terrible, and that was the point of why God was bringing his new people into this land, was to take out all these people that were truly, truly evil. But you see, even though God was saying, I'm bigger and I'm stronger, they chose not to believe him. And so what we know in the story is that there comes a point where God says, all right, listen, I'm going to allow you to wander in the desert for 40 years. You're going to wander, and this generation is going to die out, and then we'll try again with your children and grandchildren. Well, 40 years passes by. Moses is now 120 years old. Wow. And it comes this moment where he writes kind of the book of Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy is this book of the Bible that means duo. It means second. It's the second giving of the law. And when we read through Deuteronomy, it's really recapping. It's Moses speaking to what would have been their kids and grandkids of the other generation, and telling them about the stories of what God did for their parents and grandparents. And so he writes the book of Deuteronomy. He speaks all this to the people. And he speaks to this whole group of people who are these young whippersnappers in their 50s and 60s and 70s, right? And Moses up in his 120s. And he speaks to these people and their children and grandchildren, and he begins to encourage them and remind them of the promises that God had made to their parents and to the generation before them. You see, he's beginning to speak throughout all of Deuteronomy, and he reaches chapter 29, and there's this moment where in chapter 29, Moses kind of lays it out. He kind of says, if you decide to kind of go your own way, like the Lord will scatter you. God will scatter you. And you see what happens in this moment in 29 is the Lord says, listen, I'm going to allow you to be scattered, you'll go about. But then in chapter 30, Moses makes this remarkable promise, speaking on behalf of God to all the people. This promise that even if they decide to wander and continue to disobey and continue to trust in themselves and not him, they still can always return to him. You see, I'm going to read this to you. It's not going to be on the screen, but in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 through 6, they say this. It says this. Just listen to this as I read it aloud. In the future, when you experience all these blessings and curses that I've listed for you, and when you are living among the nations to which the Lord your God has exiled you, take to heart these instructions. if at that time you and your children return to the Lord your God, and if you obey with all your heart and all your soul all the commands I have given you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes. He will have mercy on you, and he will gather you back from all the nations where he has scattered you. And even though you are banished to the ends of the earth, the Lord your God will gather you from there and bring you back again. A great promise. The Lord your God will return you to the land that belonged to your ancestors, and you will possess that land again. And then he will make you more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors. The Lord your God will change your heart and the hearts of all your descendants, so that you will love him with all of your heart and soul, and so you may live. And this is a beautiful moment, because for chapters and chapters, Moses has told them, here's the scenario. If you disobey. Then chapter 29, he lays it out. Or I'm sorry, if you obey and you walk with God. But in chapter 29, this reality of if they disobey, they'll be scattered. But he then comes back with another redeeming, hopeful promise of saying, but don't worry, even further down the line, if you come back, if you heed and take heart and bring in these instructions in the way that God is trying to lead you, then he'll redeem you and restore you. But you see, as Moses continues to write, he writes this, and this is so important. He writes this in verse 11. It says, this command I'm giving you today is not too difficult for you. It is not beyond your reach. It is not kept in heaven, so distant that you must ask, who will bring it up to heaven or bring it down so we can hear it and obey? It is not kept beyond the sea, so far away that you must ask, who will cross the sea to bring it to us so we can hear it and obey? No, the message is very close. It is on your lips and in your heart so that you can obey it. And this is a moment right there in those couple of verses of Deuteronomy, verses 11 through 14. In those moments, Moses is speaking. He's speaking this reality of this blanket truth of this is simple. This is not lofty. I mean, it is on your lips, and you've got that part down, but now you need to make sure you get it down into your hearts. And this is a moment, because what happens next in chapter 31 and 32, the rest of Deuteronomy, Moses explains what's going to happen next. This is the end. This is the last bit of his kind of hoorah and encouragement to the people. This is this moment where he says, we now get the chance to try again. So let's not miss it. You see, friends, I brought us to this moment in Deuteronomy because Paul takes us there in Romans chapter 10. You see, because Paul is in this moment where he's been writing and speaking throughout all of Romans, and he speaks in this moment of chapter 9 where he explains to people, he explains in Romans 9, what we read this last week in our groups, that God's mercy is priceless, and they have taken it for granted. Man, he lays it on thick in chapter 9. God's mercy is priceless, but you have treated it like it's cheap, like it's pocket change. But now in this moment, we get to try again. And Paul brings us to Romans 10, chapter 5 through 10. It's a few slides down, Elena, if you want to go ahead and skip along a little bit. But in Romans 10, 5 through 10, he begins to write this. He says, for Moses writes that the law's way of making a person right with God requires obedience to all its commands. But faith's way of getting right with God says, don't say in your heart, who will go up to heaven? He's quoting Moses. Don't go up to heaven. Who will go up to heaven to bring Christ down to earth? And don't say, who will go down to the place of the dead to bring Christ back to life? He's mimicking Moses in this moment. And then he quotes Moses. He says in verse 8, in fact, it says, the message is very close at hand. It is on your lips, and it is in your heart. And that message is the very message about faith that we preach, Paul writes. In verse 9, he says, if you openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is by believing in your heart that you are made right with God, and it is by openly declaring your faith that you are saved. Now, this is an important moment because Paul right now is speaking verbatim. He's using Moses' own words of let's try again. As Paul writes this not to the unbelieving world, but to the people of God. He writes this to the people of God of the Old Testament who are now hearing this news of Jesus. And he writes it even in their company, also Gentiles, people from other nations and other backgrounds who are hearing the news of Jesus. But he writes this with this heart of let's try again. It is on your lips. It is so close. It's right there. You know it. You know it. But may it be in your heart. And what's fascinating is that for 10 chapters straight, Paul encourages people to trust and have faith in Jesus. But this is the first moment. This is the first moment in all of Romans where he says, trust in your heart. Believe in your heart. See, last Sunday we talked about how Paul explains to us in chapter 8 that the lock and chain on the cage had been blown off. I love one of my favorite verses in all of the New Testament, Romans 8, 12 and 13, says that we have no obligation to live by our sinful nature, but we can live by the Spirit and have life. But we are people who stick to our ways and we stay in our patterns and our rhythms. And even though the chain, the lock had been blown off and the prison door has been swung wide open for us, we stay right in our entrapment, right in the ways that have been bogging us down, right in the patterns and rhythms of life that have been very, very unhealthy for us. And you see, we asked this question last week of this promise in 8:13 that says, if those who live by the power of the Spirit will be made new, that they can walk in and have life. And so we've asked the question of how do we live by the Spirit? I mean, this is now the central focus of this Sunday and the next 2 weeks as Paul spends the rest of Romans talking about this beautiful promise of and command of loving God with all of our heart and our soul and our mind. That's not rocket science. It's not something complicated like a Rubik's Cube or anything like that. It is simple. For us to live a made new life, a transformed life, simply being people who love God with all of our heart, soul, and mind. And you see, Paul here in chapter 10, he begins now with the beginning of the transformation of our heart. You see, and I can't help but guess that he starts there because he knows that usually our heart is the one thing that we tend to leave out of the equation. You see, Dallas Willard, one of the greatest Christian writers and thinkers of the last century who passed away just over a decade ago, he wrote this wonderful book called The Renovation of the Heart. And one of his most well-known quotes from that book is this. It says, the greatest need you and I have, the greatest need of collective humanity is renovation of our heart. That spiritual place within us from which outlook, choices, and actions come has been formed by, this is so important, has been formed by a world away from God. And now it must be transformed. And you see, understand that we are a people who have this part of our humanity that holds our desires, it holds our aspirations, it holds our longings, it holds even our feelings and our joy and parts of our hope. It has our motivation and our passions. This is where the fire inside of us pumps us and moves us forward. This part of our humanity, our heart that drives us to take risks, to talk to people that we think are cute and hopefully they might reciprocate it, and to put ourselves out there, to take risks and to sacrifice. This is the part of our humanity that is willing to bleed for the things that we hold near and dear, to sacrifice and to suffer for the sake of stuff that means so much to us. This is the part of our humanity that Paul is speaking to, that Moses is speaking to, that Dallas is speaking to, that we leave out of our journey of faith. And understand, this is so important, understand that we have very much become a people who have faith in God, but have chosen to leave our heart out of it. And this is normal. I wonder what we're missing, because it seems like a few cylinders are not working as we embrace this kind of faith. See, Aaron and I, we love to go camping. We love to take our kids out into the woods and camp. But my favorite part about camping is getting to build the campfire and getting to, kind of create this beautiful piece of art that I'm going to soon light on fire, right, and watch it be destroyed. We love getting to come, and I'm not so much of a TP guy. I'm more of kind of the Lincoln log, right, guy. All right, that's kind of more of me, right? Who's more of a TP person, right? Maybe you're thinking like, yeah, the toilet paper, I love doing that, right? But we have these campfires that we build, and as a guy, right, like a part of even of our motivation of camping, what we love about camping is like, let's just burn as much wood as we can, right? And we had our guys' camping trip back in November, and we literally had, Nate's truck, his bed was full of wood. He had a whole trailer full of wood. And like we were there for like 2 or 3 days. And our goal as men was just to burn all of the wood. Like this was a good men's camping trip if we burned all this wood and we watched every single part of it turn to ash. We're simple guys, aren't we? But you see, we go about this way of constructing this beautiful fire and getting all the logs and the kindle and all the things ready. You see, what we all know, though, is that in starting a campfire, if we're working with wet wood and wet kindling, then it's never going to catch fire. We can even dump gasoline on it, but as soon as the gasoline is burned away, the fire is gone again, isn't it? See, there are groups of Christians in the world today that work very hard at organizing their life and getting it all ready and making sure it looks as they kind of appear that it should, that it looks like the right Christian life and that they say the right things. But they are very much working with wet wood in their heart. There is no fire, there is no passion for God. And they work very hard to make sure it doesn't get knocked over. But at the same time, it seems like they also work very hard to make sure it never gets lit. You see, it seems that we have gotten used to talking about our encounters with the King of the universe, but they are distant memories. They are memories from 2006, not the memories of yesterday, not the memories of today. We kind of seem like we've become a people that are used to having discussions about faith, but it's as if these are well-memorized scripts. They are not helpful, heartful conversations. And like I said just a minute ago, there's a part of us that makes very well-intentioned that it also never gets lit, that we make sure that we never take this too serious, because we know that if we do, it perhaps might cost us something. Who knows? God may call us to be a missionary in Africa. Or, oh my goodness, he may call us to sell our home and move to a more impoverished part of the community and live around people who are hurting and broken. God may call us to be outrageously generous and give away the money we've saved up for our vacation to help a family who is starving. But man, if we take this too serious, it's like we're worried that a fire will get caught. We're worried that it will cost us something. And you see, what's fascinating in this moment, as Paul is writing here in Romans 10, as he says, believe in your heart twice. And this is a very important moment. As Paul is writing this part of the New Testament, he speaks to something that on this side of history, understand, on this side of history, we kind of use this language often, but we also misquote it too. I'll get to that in a second. But understand, as he speaks to this, he speaks to, in a way, to a people who have only ever known the version of faith of leaving their heart out. And it comes to this place where he says, believe in your heart, believing in your heart. And when I spend time with people and discipling relationships and spend time with friends and we're reading the Bible and studying it together, one of my favorite questions to ask is, what does it mean to believe? What does it mean to believe? As children, we were taught to believe in Santa Claus, to believe that he exists. And then we find out that he perhaps doesn't. I don't know if there's any kids in the room, and families have certain traditions. I want to be respectful, and then we're crushed. As we grow up into our teen years, we're told to believe in ourselves. And so this idea that belief has an element of confidence with it and other things, but understand that even as we believe in ourselves in our teens and young adulthood, we still are people who fail even our own selves. And then we're told to believe in Jesus, to believe in our heart. And you see, as I ask people this question, I put it out in front of them because we have so much come from this background of idea of that even our faith and our holiness and all this stuff, that the belief is just this idea in our head that God is real. But then we lean a bit more and we talk about this very true aspect that belief is very much trusting in. To believe in Jesus is to trust. And you see, we get to this point of our conversation when we're having coffee or whatever it may be. And then I ask the question of, what does it mean to trust then? To use words in our vernacular that we just kind of race to the end, do we know what they mean and all that entails? But if we slow down and we ask ourselves, so what does it mean to trust in God? Challenges with some things. And you see, one of the things that we always walk towards in these times when I'm with people is when we talk about how believing is to trust, we also discover together that to trust in your heart is to need him in your heart. To trust is to see that Jesus himself is something that I need, that I can depend on and look to for what I am missing, and that I need him here. You see, we are a people who come to God, and we should. We are a people who come to God when we are facing hardship, when we're struggling, when we have problems in life. And absolutely, we should. I mean, do we want his guidance and wisdom? Absolutely. Do we want his hope and his peace? Absolutely. Do we want his power and miracles? Absolutely. Do we want his truth and his light? Absolutely. But oh my goodness, if you were to print out a manuscript of your prayers, how much of it is asking for what God has to offer and not himself? How much are we looking for the things that God can produce and not his presence in our life? You see, a heart that loves God is one that needs him every single day. Doesn't speak of it as something that was in the distant past, but is today, in this moment. Like a man or woman stranded in the desert who both needs and wants, but even more than wants, needs water to survive. We're people who have this craving, this hunger inside of us that today, in this moment, I need Jesus in my heart, believing in my heart. This is so important because do you notice the preposition that Paul uses in this statement? He says, believe in your heart. He does not say believe with your heart. And that is the language we typically use, is we believe with our heart that he is king. We believe with our heart that he is Lord and Savior. But understand that prepositions matter, and I'm revealing myself as a tad bit of a nerd, but that's all right. Because we know in our everyday language that if we say, hey, put the milk on the fridge, we know that we're going to have spoiled milk here in a little bit, but we actually mean put the milk in the fridge. In and on are two totally different things. In our heart and with our heart are very different. Because when we believe with our heart, we allow our heart to be like a second opinion that we trust. But in our heart, we recognize the emptiness. We recognize the hunger. We recognize the need. And it's not with our heart towards Jesus, it's Jesus into our heart and into our life. And understand that we have got to be a people as we are journeying in faith, that every single day we have this never-ending thought that I need the presence of God in me. In me. I mean, we have I have my biblical understanding and my theological understanding, but understand that I, as Andre, am nothing without the presence of God saturating my rebellious heart. Understand this, that we have got to be people who, when we spring out of bed in the morning, have got to have this constant thought in our mind and this kind of stirring within our heart that I need him, because the second I don't, I am lost. I can't do this on my own. We may have been walking with Jesus for 30 years, but man, it is a tempting thought to think I can do this without him. He's taught me his wisdom long enough. I kind of know how God would fill in the blank if I ask him for direction. I kind of know the best way that God could handle the situation. I already know what God would do if I, say this or ask for this or whatnot, or how he would want me to be. But we have got to be people who don't cheapen the mercy of God and don't overlook, man, how sinful we are. And we need him. Need him. And understand, like I said a second ago, I'm nothing without the presence of God saturating my rebellious heart. That understand that our heart is this part of us that loves to love other things. And this is why the second half of trusting in Jesus is belonging to him. And that is why to trust in Jesus in your heart is to hand it over to him so it can belong to him. So it can be his. Because understand that I love the Lord. I love him. He is all that I have and need in this world. And I'm so grateful for the life and the people and the things around me. But it all is there because of Jesus. That I have to belong to him. I need to belong to him. Because love, while it is more than a feeling, and we'll get to that in a minute, it is more than a feeling, but understand that feelings also come with this kind of love. You see, a couple of years ago, we had this young girl in our church. My goodness, she's probably in high school now, but one Sunday after church, she, every now and then she comes with her grandparents. She probably would have been in 5th grade at the time, but she wrote on the back of a piece of paper after church one Sunday and handed it to me from December 12th of 2021. And when people write things like this to me, I hold on to them. See, she wrote this. She says, "This service, Pastor Andre, was moving. I could feel my heart twist," she wrote. This is the words of a 5th grader. "I can feel all of God's love. And I used to think of myself as someone who isn't loved. He makes me feel like someone, like a someone, and not a nobody. I can feel the forgiveness flood through my heart. Thank you, Pastor Andre. I have many scars that I can feel vanishing away." When Aaron and I got married, we'll celebrate 10 years this summer. On our wedding day, her father, who's a pastor, married us, and he spoke from Ecclesiastes chapter 4. And chapter 4:13, I believe it is, I think it's verse 13. The writer of Ecclesiastes talks about how a strand of 3 cords is not easily broken. Perhaps we know that reference. You see, and he spoke about how this unifying experience of a husband leaving his family and becoming one with his wife, and them two being wound together, and then with the presence of God in their life as individuals, but in their life as a couple, that we experience this new sense of what it means to be one. Like to be one. This reality that Aaron now in a way belongs to me, and I also belong to her, in this beautiful sense of us being one as husband and wife. This closeness, this intimacy, this friendship, this joy. Understand very much of the same way, very similar way, that when we choose to hand our heart over to God, we now, in a sense, are letting it belong to Him and not us. In the same unifying way, not in a romantic type of friendship or relationship with the Creator of the universe, but in this sense of belonging that we are connected to God. And understand that our hearts love to love things they shouldn't. Our hearts love when our mind has a thought. Our heart loves to fall in love with it and daydream. And this is when affairs happen. This is when breaking trust happens. This is when we see this in our life where now our heart begins to chase after things that we try to keep it away from. Like a dog on a leash that's just wanting to go after anything. It is like our heart is this wild animal that we just can barely control. And it is. And that is why we have to let it belong to God, not to us. And that is why in our relationship with Jesus, we let it belong to Him and not to us. Because here we are with this wild thing, and we don't know how to lead it. We don't know how to walk it. And we need Him to lead us in all of it. Because we are people, friends, who go through the motions. We go through the motions of setting up the logs and doing all this stuff for appearance purposes. But understand that our hearts need to love God in a way that it has never before. And this is our moment to try again. And friends, I encourage you, in both the things that we've talked about with this need and this belonging, understand that a part of our disciplines of walking in faith, this is why we pray and sing and worship. Understand that for those who tend to leave their heart out, we must learn to fill our lives with talking and singing to God. Prayer is us talking to God. And understand, like any relationship to do well, communication has to exist. And in the same sense, in our relationship with God. Men, we tend to be short and quick to the point. But I urge you, begin to have heartfelt conversations with the King of the world throughout the day. Because He wants to spend time with you. He wants to hear your heart about things and the concerns and the worries. And He just wants to be with you if you'll let Him. Women, I encourage you. Women of today are professional multitaskers, where they feed the kids, feed more of the dog, they mow the lawn, and they go to work, and they do the laundry, and they do the dishes. And our time with God, your time with God can sometimes be on the surface. I urge you, women, to have focused moments of kneeling in the presence of God. Have your prayer, your warrior closet, your space that you chase after Jesus, and let your kids see it. Men, let your kids see it. This is how we raise up a generation who loves the Lord. Is when we have a type of faith where we talk to God and we sing. We sing in church, not because we're supposed to. That we sing a couple songs and the pastor preaches and then he sits down eventually, right? And then we sing another song like that. That is not some sort of worship service outline in the Bible. We sing because music bypasses our brain, does it not? And it gets right to our heart. It's meant to trigger things that are in here. Understand that we sing before we get to the word, and when we gather for worship is because singing, it reminds us, it stirs that we are hungry and we want this, we need Jesus. Singing gets right into our heart. It reminds us of things when the Spirit awakens and dusts off our soul and speaks to us. That's why we sing. My friend, for those of you prone to legalism, those who are prone to just making faith about rules, and those of you who are prone to intellectualism and making faith based all about head knowledge. I urge you to see that real transformation begins in your heart, from the inside out. Journeying with Jesus is not behavior modification or knowing all the things that are right and wrong. It is having a heart that loves him, wants him, needs him, belongs to him. And to my friends in the room, friend or friends, who perhaps lean the other way, who don't lean towards the direction of leaving their heart out, but actually they lean towards this pursuit of faith where their heart is king. We talked about this last Sunday. My friends in the room, people in the world, when we have this type of faith where our feelings drive everything, we notice very much that it is not good. We notice very much this hot and cold, this up and down, and understand this is not the way that relationship with God is intended to be, and there is no transformation there. See, Moses wrote back in chapter 30, verse 19 and 20, he writes this as he finishes the chapter before speaking of Joshua. He says this in Deuteronomy 30. It says, "Today I have given you the choice between life and death, between blessings and curses. And now I call on heaven and earth to witness the choice you make. Oh, that you would choose life, and so that you and your descendants might live. You can make this choice by loving the Lord your God and obeying him and committing yourself firmly to him. This is the key to your life." This is the key to your life. Understand that for those of us who lean this other direction, we have got to become people who learn to make a choice and commit. See, I kind of would like to consider myself a pretty compassionate person. But when I am driving down the road and I see one of these jump out in front of me, I don't really brake or swerve. Maybe I'll even speed up. I'm just kidding. I don't do that. But I allow the squirrel to decide whether he's going to live or die. Because what do squirrels do? They go this way and that way and this way and that way and this way and that way, and they get thumped over because they haven't just committed to their decision of crossing the road. Understand that when we live by a faith that is based on feelings, we do the same thing. Where God's want me to do this. No, he's not. Oh, God wants me to do this. Oh, no, I misheard him. Oh, he wants me to go this way. Oh, I'm so unsure. I'm so insecure. I'm not sure. Or, oh, yes, he wants me to go this way. Oh, I'm not going this way. And we go this back and forth. And we are struck and we wonder why. We wonder why when we live this rhythm of faith that it does not work. We see it in our own life, in the life of people we love, and man, it breaks us. Because this is the key, is what Moses says. This is the key to life, that we would choose. And we're going to talk in the next couple of weeks, loving God with our mind and loving God with our soul, how we can discern and follow the will of God and be confident in it, but understand that we will be unsure. We will not be totally confident all of the time. But understand when we lean this direction of living by our feelings, letting our heart in a very unhealthy way dictate our life and our faith. We're hot and cold, hot and cold. One day we're one thing, one day they're the next thing. Understand that he just wants us to set our eyes on him and say, all right, I'm in this. So friends, I encourage you, wherever you are with God, whatever way you lean in this journey of faith, whether you leave your heart out or it makes up way too much of it, friends, I urge you, come to this place of a healthy walk with God where your heart is right where he wants it to be. Your love for him, your love for the world. I encourage you. Rebalance this part of you, and you'll begin to experience a transformed life into freedom. The journey begins with this. Friends, we're going to sing a song together. We're going to end our time with perhaps what is one of my favorite hymns. Perhaps this could be a moment where our hearts are a little dusted off. Perhaps this could be a moment where we sing a song and worship, and man, we are reminded of how the King of the universe cares for us, and how he is close, and how he loves us. Maybe we could be reminded of some intimate moments of encountering Jesus years ago. But perhaps we can pick up back where we left off and allow this same freshness, this same rejuvenating relationship to exist in our faith. I love the lyrics of this song that through it all, we're going to set our eyes on Jesus. Through it all, it is well with my soul. Friends, can we stand together and pray, and we'll sing this last song.